Hey everybody, it's Jake, and today we're talking about circular saws. So these two saws are designated as sidewinder saws because the motor is on the side. And again, there's other types out there, but we're just going to go over these because this is probably what you're going to see in the store. So we're going to start with the Milwaukee, and then we'll talk about the Ridgid in just a second. So let's talk about this corded Milwaukee. This is a 6391 is the model number of this, and this thing is a stout machine. I mean, it's beefy, it's heavy, it's pretty indestructible, and just ergonomics on this are really nice. I really like it, and we'll show you those in a second. But let's just show you kind of what's going on with the whole thing. I've got my upper blade guard. It's really nice. My lower blade guard works smoothly. The shoe is really nice. This is made out of aircraft aluminum, and it's held up pretty well. A lot of companies make theirs out of steel or magnesium, but this is done well. I'm not complaining about it. It's done a good job, and I'm happy with how it's worked so far. Another feature with this saw is I can actually adjust the angle of my handle and pivot this up or pivot it down. So I'm going to release this, and I can press this up to give me a little bit taller angle, or if I want to bring that back down, it's pretty tight. I can bring that back down to adjust that to where I want to cut, which is really nice. Also, to adjust my shoe or cut depth, I just have my lever here, and that's really nice just to bring that down. Really easy to lock, really easy to use, no special tools or anything like that. And so that's really nice setup too. For my bevel cut, I already have this unlocked here, but this moves smoothly. And this I can take all the way to 50 degrees. Most saws will go to 45, but I can go a little bit beyond that. So that's also a nice feature on this saw as well. And that just is a cam lock there to lock that in place. For changing out the blade, it does come with a special tool. And all I have to do is press this button right on top to find where that lockout is on the saw. Once that's locked, I just take my tool, and the change on the blade is also very easy. I really like that as well. So let's talk about this Ridgid cordless saw and some of the features it has. On this, I've got a plastic blade guard, which I don't care for, but it works out pretty nice. On the shoe, I believe this is magnesium, and it's held up really well. I've done a lot of work with this in the past. And the port here for ejecting the sawdust, that works really good for kicking that out. I'm really happy with that. On this side, for adjusting my bevel, I can turn this, and it actually has these positive stops here at 30, 45, 22 and a half. So I know exactly where I'm at, which is a really nice feature. I really like that. For adjusting my shoe and blade depth, really easy to do here. Nice cam lock, locks into place, really solid. That's a really nice feature as well. One thing I really like about this saw is it's got a brake on it, where this saw does not. So when I hit the trigger and I let go, it only takes about a second for it to stop, or maybe even a little less. So that's a really nice feature that this saw has that this one does not. Also, another safety feature that's built in, I actually have a little switch right here, right on the very top. And so I can, if I'm pulling this trigger, it will not turn on until I push that down with my thumb. And then I can make this thing do what it's supposed to do. So this is really nice, super portable, does a great job for what I want it to do. If I just need to rip through a bunch of material, this is also a great choice. So let's go over some safety things as far as setup, and let's cut some wood. So before we even start cutting, let's talk about blades real quick. There's lots of different types of blades out there. You got cross cut, you've got ripping, you've got combination blades, you've got this one in that will cut through steel, but you got to be careful because it throws steel everywhere as you're cutting. And this particular Evolution blade doesn't come with the right arbor for this. It's actually bigger than the arbor here, so you have to get an adapter to make it work. Diablo makes one that actually fits this, will actually cut through steel. But make sure you're using the right blade for the right application for what you're cutting. For our piece that we're cutting here, we want to also make sure it is secure, so you need to get a clamp or a vise or something, and just make sure that we don't have to be holding this while trying to cut this. Probably the most important step is setting our blade depth. So I'm going to pull my blade guard out of the way and loosen up my shoe, and I'm going to drop this down so the bottom of my blade is just below my workpiece. And these are called the gullets, these round parts right there. Generally, I want that gullet right there at the bottom of my workpiece. And that's as far as I need to cut through my board. I don't need to go any deeper than that. Another key to this is that my shoe is always on the piece that is stationary, not the piece that is being cut off, because I don't have a lot of support here with just 1 inch of my shoe, where I do with I have this whole 5 inches of my shoe. So always remember, you want the larger part of your shoe on the piece that's staying and the 1 inch to be on your offcut. So as I turn on the circular saw, I want to make sure the blade is not touching the material before I start. I'm going to let the motor come all the way up to speed, and then I'm going to take the circular saw all the way through the material. Now when I mark my line, I've got a couple options to make sure I stay on that line. One is to take my saw and I'm going to line up this edge of this notch where it says 0 degrees on that side of the line, and the kerf of the blade will then be on this side on my offcut piece. If I run this right down the center, if I want it right down the center, I can do that, but generally I want that gap, I want the wood that I'm saving to be on this side of the gap, and that groove is generally the kerf of my blade or how wide my blade is. And so if I'm putting this right on the line here, I'm actually going to lose about 1/16 of an inch as I make that cut. If I don't care, if I just want to run that through, it's just rough cut, that's fine. I like to stay right here, so I am running this portion right against my line as I do my cut. Now, cutting this freehand does take some skill and take some practice, but you can get it. If you want kind of some guardrails and just something to make sure that you're actually cutting this straight, you can use what's called a speed square. And I'm just going to line this up. I'm going to put my shoe against that speed square, and I'm going to line it up right where I want it. Make sure the kerf of the blade is to the outside of my cut, and then I can go ahead and make my cut and be nice and straight. So for sheet goods like this, I want something underneath it to support it. I don't want just the end hanging off and then this just dropping to the floor, because usually I'll get it splintering out at that very edge, because all the tension of all the pressure of this offcut is going to usually tear off that corner, and I want that to be nice and clean. So I can do a couple things. I can put maybe a sacrificial 2x4 every 18 inches or so all the way down the line, or another option that I really like is this foam. You can buy this at any big box store. And I can just put a piece of that underneath, lay that on top, mark my line, and now I can run this through, and now my offcut piece is supported. So let's give that a shot. Again, one of the most important things is to drop our blade about 1/4 inch below our board and lock it down, and we're good to go. Now when it comes to cutting sheet goods, we have a couple options. One is just simply mark one end, how much you want to cut off. The other end, same distance, how much you want to come off, and then I'm just going to draw a straight line from one mark to the next. The other thing I can do is just take my chalk line, put that right on my mark, and chalk that line, and that will also give me a mark. That also works, and I can do this by hand. It takes a little practice to get that straight, but it's doable. Another method to use is either a clamp like this, or your own homemade zero clearance sled for your circular saw. And those are really easy to build. There's lots of videos out there on those, so I'll post some of those down below. But they're really easy to make, really accurate, and super repeatable cuts all day long. So I'll also link that, because that can also be an option. For this setup, what we need to do is actually from here to here needs to be 5 inches, because on our shoe, from our mark here where our blade goes to the end of the shoe, that's 5 inches on this particular saw. And most are, but you always want to check with your saw to double check. So let's go ahead and set this up, and let's cut this off. 5. Couple of the tips when it comes to cutting sheet goods and smaller parts. One, if you're cutting some sheet goods, make sure it's supported across the whole piece of that sheet. You don't want offcuts just falling off and splintering off and that kind of thing. Also, I've seen it where a piece of sheet is supported on this end and a piece of sheet is supported on this end, and someone's trying to cut right down the middle. This whole thing is just going to collapse and bind on the blade, and you're just asking for trouble. So make sure it's supported all the way across that piece of sheet. Also, for small cuts, obviously I'm not cutting really small things on this. If I've got just a little block or whatever, I'm not trying to make really small cuts or get my hand anywhere close to that blade. So be aware of that. And if it does bind up on you, let's say I'm cutting through the sheet and it does start to bind, I got it right here, and it's going, it's going, it's going. All of a sudden, I'm getting some resistance. I hear the blade kind of bogging down. I'm just going to let go of the trigger. I'm not going to try and force it through or muscle it through. I'm not usually going to win that fight ever. So be aware of that. If you need to stop, just back up about an inch, start the blade up, make sure it's not in the material, and try continuing your cut again and see if that doesn't remedy the problem. But you never actually want to just fight through something, because usually it's not going to be a good deal. So I hope this helps out with the circular saw. I think this is a great tool to have in your toolbox arsenal, and it does a lot of stuff and can do it really fast, even sometimes faster than me setting up on a table saw and getting all that going. So if you have any other questions about this or comments on the circular saw, please be sure to leave those below. And this is Jake of All Trades saying we'll see you next time.